babushka on. My dudes, what's happening, man? This is Trent. And one of the things that I got to do that's pretty cool in my line of business is that I get to meet a lot of pro artists, a lot of, I guess you'd say, like, you know, people of the legendary class of artists in both comic books and video games. If you've played League of Legends, you've seen his work, you've seen his character designs, his world building. If you've read comic books in the last few years, you've more than likely heard of or seen comics with his name on it. Somehow, this guy manages to excel at a high level in both of, I'd say, two of the most difficult industries to work in, and he's doing very well at it. So in this video, we get a chance to talk a little bit about work-life balance. We get a little bit of a chance to talk about that anxiety that even as a professional, you start to feel even after you've made it. And one of the most exciting things that I wanted to talk with him about was his transition of having grown up in the Philippines and migrated over to the US in order to build a career in art, which is a very difficult thing for somebody to do. And he did all that before the internet even. So join me in this, I would say it's a pretty casual conversation with my good friend, Eric Canete. Let's kind of intro people a little bit to who you are, what you do, and what basically what your responsibilities are on the day-to-day. But let's start with, first of all, where are you from? Were you born in the US?
No, originally I was born in the Philippines, in Manila, and I didn't move to the United States until I was about fourth, fifth grade, thereabouts. I've disassociated the age group that you're at when you're at those grades, but yeah, about fourth or fifth grade, and then from there, I've been in Southern California since.
Do you have family over there? You still go back?
I still do, yeah. As a matter of fact, my mom, when she retired from the U.S., went back home so she could be closer to family.
Cool. It's quite a time difference.
There is, yeah, for sure. You know,
yeah,
so
that's a long flight.
Sometimes if I'm not careful, I'm not being very attentive, I'll call her at the most awkward hour just to say hello.
Yeah, well, it's good to just have the family, the voice, you know, just even that. And nowadays we have Skype and such, so that's really nice.
Oh yeah, trying to walk my mom through, like, you know, how technology works, like Skype, that's a reach. But the phone is always available to her, which is nice.
So growing up in Manila, growing up in the Philippines, what was your, like, thinking you're going to grow up to be an artist in the United States?
Yeah.
That's got to be like, where does a kid get that idea that they can pull that off? What's the inspiration? What's the influence? What got you drawing? Let's start with that. Like, what got you drawing? And then what got you into thinking of it as something you could do seriously?
Sure. I have an older cousin. I was basically raised by all of my cousins because I'm an only child, right? So they all took turns, all dudes, all bros, and they took turns raising me. And the youngest of my cousins, a guy by the name of Ferdinand, was a really great artist. Oh. He knew how to draw, right?
Like pencil and paper. This is before digital.
Yeah. And he'd always sort of, like, if you give him enough reference, he can pretty much either A, copy, or B, create. But he sided more towards the copying. And I just remember watching him draw that. Anything, like everything from like Star Wars to fashion magazines to just you name it. I was like, oh man, I really want that. So it's sort of this competition that I got into. And I remember, I don't know if you remember, there was this thing as a kid. It's so old school. You might not even remember what it is, but it's like a magic slate. Have you ever seen that before? Where it's like you draw on top of it and you can lift it and it disappears and you can draw on top of it again. It's like this recyclable.
What's that called? Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
I keep calling it as a magic slate, right?
Okay,
but it's like in the Philippines, there was this bootleg version that had like DC heroes on one side, Marvel heroes on the other side of the borders of this thing, right?
Yeah.
And I remember, like, I would go to my mom and she would copy the Spider-Man that's off in the corner.
Yeah.
And the jerk cousin, Bertie, would like lift up the corner so like his leg would disappear.
Yeah.
You know, I'm like, oh my God, I'd be so devastated. I'd go run into my mom. And it got to the point where my mom got super annoyed by her having to do it. So I picked up on that. It's like, you know what, I'd better learn how to do this stuff on my own. And so I started understanding, like, oh, that's what the leg looks like when it's foreshortened. You know, that's what it looks like when it's going away from me and so on.
So it was like
I learned to copy before I learned how to draw.
Yeah, from like official or from looking at other comic books, like I guess American comic books.
Yep, pretty much. And then there was no industry, at least when I was growing up, or at least maybe I wasn't aware of it, but there was no industry or any sort of income to be made becoming an artist. As a matter of fact, as good as my cousin Ferdy was, I think he could have been, if he had this kind of access to what we have access to today, as far as like the world becoming smaller because of the internet, right? I grew up in like the mid to late 70s, early 80s. If we had any access to that, I bet you he'd be an artist today. But part of we grew up, moderately poor. So the only way that our idea, or at least our value, was like the way you get out of this sort of poverty is to actually through education. You know what I mean? And most of that education is only directly applicable to like industry and business. So he went more into that. It took me moving to the United States and somehow convincing my mom that I'm going to draw or this is the thing that I'm super passionate about. And then she finally got behind it. Now, mind you, she's a single parent, raising a kid. And so trying to find this sort of resources to be able to afford in order to sort of like help foster an artistic interest was very challenging for her. I remember taking those. I don't know if you remember, they used to have these like, can you draw Sparky, like the turtle from like the University of Minnesota. Remember that?
Mm-hmm. Or it'd be like a pirate head or something, and it was like a thing you send away for.
I took that class.
You did.
Oh yeah.
They advertised it in comics all the time.
Yeah, that was like the mail away courses, and I never got into it because it was too focused on foundational stuff. And right around that time, that's when I found like comic books. I'm like, when am I going to get to draw like the cool people punching each other out? Right. Not realizing that's just as important, right?
Yeah.
So that's basically where I got that start.
Even though it seemed really far away and you didn't even know how it would make money, you still like found resources through just determination. This is kind of before the internet too, though, right? Or is this?
Yeah, we're talking about like going to the local either magazine stand or comic book store and finding a resource, like an image somewhere in the back, or an interview from a creator, and you're like, he talks about his process, and you show like a little tiny thumbnail of this thing that he was drawing. Oh my gosh, what is that? That you wouldn't think that's enough to sort of feed you as far as like inspiration and motivation is concerned. But as a kid, when that's all you have, it's like, you lived off of that,
Well, this is really interesting because, I every now and then I'll do videos about like, how do you break into, because I do a lot of tutorials here on YouTube and whatnot. And every now and then I'll do a video where I'm like, hey, here's some ideas for ways to make money as an artist getting started, because, the first few dollars is like the hardest thing to break into, to start getting paid to do art. And a lot of times I get feedback from people saying, well, there's just no art industry in my country, or I just don't have access to that. And what's interesting is that like we live in a time that I could say all day, oh, look, you can go online and it doesn't matter where you're from. Yeah. But who's going to listen to me? I grew up in the United States where there's this market for comic books and whatnot, and so hearing it from you that you're just like, even before the internet, you were like, hey, you could still make that happen. You made a career out of this. You really kind of did the impossible. You did a really difficult thing. In hindsight, maybe taking the business classes might have been helpful too.
I just think that if there is enough of motivation behind it, I don't know if the sort of like the gateway or the entryway, right, might be a little bit opaque, but it's not impossible.
Yeah.
You just actually have to, like, it takes a lot of work depending on the challenges and the mountains that you have to go sort of like scale, but it's not impossible. And especially like, I would relish the opportunity to be 18, 17 again and have the sort of resources that we have now.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm learning to program from YouTube.
Yeah. Can you imagine? Can you imagine just like reaching, like being able to have the creator that you are sort of like mimicking your work and being them having like as far away as Twitter, like,
oh my God. When I was a teenager, before I got really into being a professional comic book artist, I had gotten my hands on a VHS interview with Todd McFarlane, Rob Liefeld, and Jim Lee. And it was like, do you know this video I'm talking about? This is a famous video. And you can still watch it on YouTube. And And I treasured this VHS, like I watched it over and over. Oh, what kind of pen is he using? And like, oh, it's a Crockwell pen. They kind of rock started up a little bit. They got makeup on and the swooshy hair, and they're like doing
Hold
like,
on. If you hear my
music.
kid crying in the background, please forgive me. I hope it
Oh,
doesn't
no,
ruin.
no, it's fine. Actually, one of the lights went out. It's kind of hard to see you.
Oh
You're a
yeah.
little bit in shadow. I don't know if you've got like a monitor light or something. That would help. Cool, thanks.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know what you're saying. Like nowadays, you could just tune into Todd McFarlane's YouTube channel, or
Yeah.
I think he posts videos on Twitter or something. Like,
Absolutely.
dude, this is awesome. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, I always follow that guy's work. He was one of my favorite artists, and to have that nowadays, and I try to think of that when I'm doing my own videos. I'm like, gosh, if I were like that 16-year-old version of myself, what would be super awesome for me to
Yeah,
to
for sure.
tune in to find out? Up in Oregon, huh?
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
part?
About 20 minutes outside of Oregon, maybe as many as 30 in a city called Lake Oswego. Have you heard of it before?
No, sorry.
It was like the first time I went to go visit her family, it was right out of like Pleasantville.
Yeah,
Like where you go, this is a throwback kind of town.
yeah.
Ice cream shops with a bell on the doors and the whole bit, right?
Really? Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
beautiful, beautiful, beautiful city, and it's way out of our price range. But we're going to try to be as close there as possible, so that it's not too difficult for us to sort of just give them a call and say, hey, we need your help, and or for her mom to visit because her mom is so in love with our kid.
Man, having family close is such a blessing.
Yeah,
Especially, I mean, I don't have kids, but I imagine, like, I know a lot of my friends who have kids, and it's like, if you're living in California or you're living a busy life as an artist or a game developer,
yeah.
man, having a family to help out during those times is such an essential thing. I mean, it from what I've seen, because I mean, it's another job, and you're already working like four
Yeah.
jobs.
Yeah. What do you call it? My wife actually just decided to be a full-time mom. She's working as a storyboard artist in animation, and she's just, there's no way for us to juggle, trying to hold on to a gig and also raise a kid correctly, especially in the sort of values that she wants to instill in the kid. It just would not be ideal to have like both of us working off site. You know what I mean? Or excuse me, working away from. So she's like, if you can handle it, I'll be a full-time mom. And I'm like, yeah, okay.
So is this like semi-retirement for you guys? I mean, it's a
For
totally different lifestyle for you.
No, for her it is. I don't know where our income is going to come from if
Okay.
I get fully retired. But
I don't think you have to worry about that. I mean, I don't know her work. I don't know what
yeah,
she's been doing. I don't
yeah.
follow the animation industry as much. But I think you're fine. I mean, you've got this
Honestly, Trent, that's
serious history.
kind, but I really don't have a metric or a measure of exactly my impact on an industry. Like, I don't know how employable I am if I were to go someplace else and be like, hey, I want to go try something else and go, try freelance full time or go to a game company that's elsewhere. Like, I have no concept of that because I grew up in animation and in comics. I fell accidentally ass backwards into like video games. So I don't have an idea of like, oh, I wonder if there's any sort of, professional equity behind my body of work in video games. So it's
Dude,
like,
that's funny to me. You're like a legend. Like
yeah,
you
that's kind, but I've never put it to the test before. Thank you.
I know what you mean. It's scary. It's because you don't know, right? But I mean, you worked in comic books before. That's freelancing. I mean, technically speaking, you were doing that before and you
Yeah,
found plenty of work. It was no problem.
it was very hard only because the work ratio, the amount of work that you're pouring into comics versus the compensation that they would give you for it, it didn't line up. And you've been in this, you've done comics, so this
That's
is
why I left.
yeah, it's exactly why I was like, oh my gosh, there's things called animation, and I actually get paid for the time that I sit up behind the desk, and not only that, I get I get benefits, and I actually get a 401k, and then I get, you know what I mean, and then going into video games, same thing. It's like, what do I need comics for?
That's really interesting because I consider you at the top of the class for comic book artists, and to hear that it's something that even for you, it was challenging to make a substantial enough amount of money to survive it consistently, right?
I'll
For the
tell you.
amount of work you put into it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll tell you this. It's not. I don't think it has anything to do with the comic book industry. I think it has a lot to do with my lack of professionalism when I was doing it. It's like
What do you
I,
mean? What were you
I,
doing?
I was just doing way too much for the kind of schedule that they were throwing at me. I never switched that gear into like I need to come up with a version of my work that makes this sustainable. I always wanted to like draw the hell out of something and like not getting in my dumb head where it's like you can't do that page after page after page. You actually have to pick the fights where it's like this is the panel that's going to be the badass one, whereas the rest of these I'm going to shift it into a gear. Like I said, it's sustainable and it won't kill me. And it won't, like there's like a cadence in by which you have to deliver these pages so that it's actually a decent amount. Like I don't want to say decent because that's giving the comic book industry way too much credit, but like it's like you're like it's actually manageable to live like this, and in California, it was borderline impossible, right?
Right. Yeah, I was doing Ghostwriter in the early 2000s, living in
Oh,
Hollywood,
right.
and so literally every dime that I made. So I think they gave me a page rate of 175 a page, but I would spend 12 hours penciling, just penciling, which was not well thought out business.
Right.
You know what I mean? I was just so excited to have a shot. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean? And I almost feel like that's kind of how a lot of big comic book companies make their money, is off of younger people who haven't like figured out, oh, okay, if I have to budget 8 hours of work, how many pages can I actually get done in that period of time?
For sure.
Some people, the most successful comic book artists, like guys like Ali Garza, that dude can jam out 4 pages a day.
Yeah,
Or
sure.
Ashley Wood, like these guys can jam out massive quantities of work. But like you said, they found that budget of like, this is how much work I can get done in a day and still make it exciting. Like
Yeah.
pinpoint what makes your work exciting, but
Yeah.
also efficient for you to be able to generate in order to do
Yeah.
it quickly. And I wouldn't do a comic unless I could do like 4 pages a day. It's just
Yeah.
not financially viable.
Yeah, I couldn't. I can't do it except for the most recent project that I'm not at liberty to talk about. Where
Oh,
I
are
threw
we getting a
that.
scoop here?
I threw at them a very specific schedule
Yeah.
and page rate, which I knew just based on my understanding of everything is like this is a no across the board, right?
Yeah.
This much per page, and I said this much per time, and when they were like, yeah, okay, I was like, oh no, I don't have anything to. I can't deny that now because
Yeah.
they actually said yes to everything, and I was
Right.
like, okay, I'll go and do that, and I'm pretty dang excited about it.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. I mean, that's also something that comes from experience, is knowing the value of what you have. When you were younger, you probably could have
Yeah,
asked for more too.
I think it goes a little bit to what you were talking about when you were talking about doing Ghostwriter. You were just so excited to do it that you were like the enthusiasm made up for the lack of compensation. But at some point, I'm in my 40s now. Like I can't. My time behind the desk, most importantly, now that even before the kid, right? It was already so precious to me. Like I needed to have. I can't over-index on work anymore. It doesn't make any sense to me. It's like the benefits that I get from stepping away from the desk far outweigh anything that I'm doing when I'm sitting there drawing something.
There is a point at which, like, I was a workaholic my whole life.
Yeah.
And there came a point where I was like, I want to live. Like, I started getting into good, healthy relationships that weren't
Sure.
destructive, because I think I escaped into art because of my destructive tendency and poor social skills.
Sure.
And now it's like, I have fairly decent social skills, still working on that. But
Yeah.
what I'm saying is life got more interesting. Life got more full. I started to travel more. I started to see places. I
Yeah.
developed, I got married, and my wife is very close with her family. I started getting involved in a family, which is all very like, that's not work table stuff, but
Yeah.
it's what makes life, the whole point is to like have great relationships with people and have a fulfilling existence. So you got to find that balance. You're one of those people. I didn't think that this would be the topic of the conversation, because in my notes it's like, man, first of all, I'm going to say, like, when I talk about anybody about Eric Canete, I hear that dude is fast and he's one of the most hardworking artists in the biz. And that's
Yeah.
in the video game industry where people are notoriously hard workers. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know what they're using as a point of reference as far as my hard work is concerned. I think I alienate a whole lot more people when I go into work mode. Right now that I have a lot more leadership responsibilities at work, I actually have to tap into that's it's not really social, but definitely more like people skills. You know what I mean? Like I have to. There's a lot of personality management. You're more of a coach rather than a guy who, rather than the hand.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's been an amazing, but I'll say this, very fulfilling challenge and growth being given that opportunity.
Yeah.
And in as far as like the speed is concerned, I think that's just me being deathly afraid that I'm not going to have that much time left. Like I always look at it as like people are generations ahead of me, especially in the video game industry. Like I take a look at the stuff that people are doing, and I'm like, holy cow! On my best day, on a good night's sleep, best breakfast, you know what I mean? Like 20 pounds lighter, I could never be that good. So I better do my very best to catch up.
So it's fear.
I get this feeling of like I'm playing catch up to everybody.
Yeah, so it's fear that motivates you mostly, right?
Not necessarily because the lacking of like the lacking of motivation as far as like getting there. It's more like how much time do I have left? I always think of everything as like, it's not as morbid as it's going to sound. It's like I think I have like 20 years left. Before I become absolutely irrelevant.
You know what, man? It's not that crazy. My whole life, I felt like I maybe got 5 years left.
Sure.
But I mean, I used to be a smoker, a drinker. I mean, I got into a lot of trouble, and I drove myself into the ground. I do all-nighters for work,
Yeah, that's crazy.
And so I know what you're saying. I always kind of felt like, well, what if I don't get to finish that novel?
Yeah.
That I'm writing, or what if I don't get to finish that indie game that I'm learning to program, or like, so I know what you're saying. And there's always that feeling that, like, I think, especially when you're working you've literally worked at some of the top video game industry companies, you've worked at some of the top comic book companies, and there's still that feeling of like, am I going to become obsolete? It's the gunslinger's mentality. You've got to always show up and be the fastest. And the best and like the strongest. And that can be, what that does to your psyche over the course of, I'm also in my 40s. So like I've been doing this a while and I feel that too. So you've done the Twitch thing for a while and you're putting that down to focus on family. You're finding that work-life balance. You're moving into kind of a new chapter with your life. Do you have current projects that you're really excited about that you can talk about? Or what's next for Eric Canete? What are your personal goals?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm horrible at digitally painting anything. So it's like I found a passion for that recently, and it's not anything except to say I want to go get good at that. Like I keep bringing up this word where it's like relevancy ultimately in the long term doesn't necessarily mean anything. I can't build a legacy towards relevancy, but I can build a legacy towards like pouring myself into this version of my work now. Like the comics thing is great, done that. The animation thing is great, and I've done that. The video game thing, I don't think I've tried 100% at that yet, So yeah, because like I don't know how to like digitally paint environments very well, right? And you and I think that's what sort of that was the text that I sent you that springboard this conversation, which is like, hey, I just downloaded your thing from Gumroad, and I'm gonna watch the hell out of it now.
Yeah. I'm like, why is Eric Canete, this rock star artist, why is he watching my Gumroad channel?
No, that's it. That's the specific reason, which is like I want to just get the biggest brain dump on like how does Trent do that versus like how does Sparth do that versus how does like Mache do that, all of these guys and influences, and eventually I look at it as like a buffet bar, like I like the way he does that and I'm going to incorporate it. I like the way he does this and I'm going to incorporate it. What I think I've seen as far as like a look is concerned, and I jokingly tongue-in-cheekly say like there is but as far as concept art is concerned, there is this weird incestual nature that it has a tendency to kind of like glom together, right? And there's a handful of individuals that are standouts, and you take a look at them and you're like, right? They helped establish that look and feel, and now everything is sort of like spidering from that, you know? And that to me is ultimately my goal, is to come up with something where you take a look at it and you go like, oh yeah, that's a Canete environment, or you know, just the way the render quality of that, I know that's Eric's painting, or I know that, you know.
You certainly have that for your characters, you know, and for your line art on paper. Like you already have that distinct, unique Canete style. Like
Yeah, yeah.
it's. I first became aware of your work on the Diablo 3 project, and I don't know if you know Christian Leitner, or do you
I,
know him personally?
I do.
He brought in some of your work, and he was just like, "Dude, if we're doing a Diablo comic, this is our guy." You
Um,
know, and yeah, and so that was when I first became aware of your work, and ever since then, it's just been so distinct. And I wouldn't guess that you struggle with the digital at all, because it seems like you scan in your line work and then you do a digital pass, right?
yeah, from time to time, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The pipeline now is like pure on digital, because
Okay.
I want to not be afraid of that, because the safety net, as if you will, was always doing everything in line art and then putting everything in digital and being like, okay, I can now just kind of pretty this up with digital brushes. But now I'm trying to get away from that and go like, what does it feel like to go into full on digital production, or have a digital pipeline to be like start to finish? What does it look like? And man, oh man, have I been getting my ass handed to me by every member on my team. It's amazing. It's such a good feeling to be the weakest guy on that team. You know? I
This is,
love that feeling, dude.
you know, it's one of those things that I think a lot of artists from the outside looking in, I think they imagine that once you get in, like the critiques stop or something. But you actually have to learn to enjoy that somebody cares enough to destroy your artwork. To like
Oh, yeah.
to
Yeah.
go, no, this is why this part's wrong. And it takes us, I just did a video about the subtle art of critique, you know, because it's
Yeah.
about this,
Sure.
because sometimes people get overly cautious and sensitive. And
Yeah.
like if you're a seasoned pro, you got to be able to take some pretty like harsh lashings, you know what I mean? And compartmentalize
Yeah.
that feedback into actionable items, right? Like things that
Absolutely.
are actually beneficial to help you. And if something is not going well, sometimes sure it's the other artist's ego that's like, oh, this is shit or whatever. Like I've heard some
Yeah.
crazy stuff, man. Like I've
Yeah.
heard some brutal feedback before. But what my takeaway is not the words that they're using. You know what I mean? My takeaway is like what they're actually giving me, which is
Yeah.
like what they're really trying to say is this part's boring, or that part is not exciting, or that part is rendered poorly, or this part draws too much attention away from this cool part. And you're
For sure.
reading between the lines, and that's the hardest part.
Yeah, parsing feedback is like this acquired skill that you might not have right away, because the nature of producing art is so very personal, you know? So a part of it is like everything that you just said right now, which is like understanding ultimately the bigger takeaways in which you can incorporate and make actionable. But also a part of it I've come to take on to myself, which is to say like everything I draw is dismissible. I'm not married to any and all of it. You know, like all I have is the body of work that I'm going to produce. And if I somehow hit upon something that's great, cool, let me try to retain that, because that's my issue. I can't retain it so that it's applicable to the next thing. I have issues with that, right? But if I don't, I attach myself just enough so I can learn from it. But I don't attach myself to the thing where I'm precious about it.
Yeah,
You know?
nothing is precious. You can't
Yeah.
be as a concept artist. And people don't might not realize how much of it doesn't even get used.
Yeah,
You know, it especially at the bigger studios.
for
From
sure.
working in console, it was like, yeah, sure, they'd use like 90% of what I did because they don't have a choice.
For
It's like
sure.
we got a
Yeah.
budget of 18 months to finish a game. I don't know what it's like now,
Right.
but working in working at a company like Riot, I have never seen so much that wasn't used. You know,
For sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah,
heartbreaking.
like I
Yeah.
said, so I stay as detached and dismissive about it as I can, and I find that I do a whole lot of learning when I do.
Yeah. There's one thing that you're really good at that I wanted to ask you about. So you're like for a while there when you were doing the Twitch thing, and I suspect that you do this a lot. Every time I see a drawing by you, it's like totally freaking different. It's like you're
Yeah,
using dynamic poses. You're doing these incredible compositions, and it's like not like the composition you did before. Like
yeah.
how are you where are you pulling inspiration from? Like where is that mechanism that makes you still, but it's still always in your style. That's the
Yeah.
craziest thing. It's like this guy is reinventing himself every damn day, but he's still delivering the
Generates.
brand that people really like and love, right? So
Yeah.
like where are you pulling inspiration from? Like what is your big influence that allows you to like wake up and go, today I'm going to draw Quiet from Metal Gear Solid 5, like
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
what is it that's giving you your sort of, where do your ideas come from?
Great.
I said it.
Easy.
I said the most cliche question to ask an artist. What kind of pencil do you use?
Yeah.
Where do
Yeah.
your ideas come from, man? Like where are you pulling inspiration? Where do you get that idea that you're like, today I'm going to be working on that drawing?
I think, I mean, it's a very broad question, but I think the best way I can answer it, though, with every piece that I draw, and I don't even think about the style anymore, which is strange. I don't think of it as like, what's the unifying thing that makes it look like my stuff? I don't ever, that's never the goal. My goal is always like, if I see something and I go like, I don't know how to do that, right? Or if it's like, oh, that's in digital, but I bet you I can replicate that in pen and ink, or if I can replicate that during using markers or something. Like I'm gonna go like, as long as it's not in my wheelhouse, that's where I find the biggest piece of like, well, I'm gonna learn that,
So it's like you're taking everything around you and you're kind of squeezing it through that like that the I guess it's like a lens, right? The Eric Canete lens. It's like this is
Yeah,
how it looks to me
for sure.
viewing
Yeah.
my style, right?
It's not even that like whatever happens on paper is just I think there's that becomes muscle memory, like the way things look or that lens that you're talking about. I'm gonna draw it the way I'm gonna draw it, right? And oftentimes it's like awful. But what I pay attention more is like I don't know, I've never done a soft lens focus just using traditional tools. Like I don't know what that looks like. I want to go figure out to see if I can get close to it. Sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's not. I want to be able to capture a piece of narrative that's like from Jurassic Park and the Gallimimus like stampede. Like I've never drawn that before. I want to right as again. It's like I challenge myself because if I keep drawing the same thing over and over again, like what's the point of that, right? Like I have the opportunity to go learn as much as I can on while I'm up in the morning, and this is the kind of stuff that's the stuff that keeps me wanting to come back. Right. What becomes sort of like this tedious, like this tedious death. And they're like, oh, go draw the same thing 3 times over and over and over and over again. And I'm like, oh, God.
And yet you chose to work in comic books where that's pretty much, and animation, which is pretty much what you do.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
the thing. It's like, I think that's when my shelf life or my term limit for those industries run out, right? That's where the drop off happens, where it's like I think I've learned as much as I can from this, and then I go like, what's the next challenge, or when do I stop mailing things in? Because I've caught myself going like, this is not the best set of shots when it comes to like this thing that I'm storyboarding, but I know it's serviceable and I know it's not going to get changed. I know it's probably going to be an easy green light for my directors and the producers because it's so sort of just like it's safe, and I hate doing that, right? So it's like the moment it's. I remember when I was working on Teen Titans, like this direct-to-video thing, the Teen Titans movie that they were doing years and years ago, and there was a fight scene between Robin and I can't remember the antagonist, but I didn't want to cut, right? Like I just wanted to do everything in one, and it scared the hell out of producers not because of the exercise, but because it didn't give them any place to go should the animation be bad, right? Like the way that you can save like certain fight scenes if animation portions are not, they have like an A, B, and C team, right? That's doing animation overseas, and so, heaven forbid a portion of that animation comes back and it's just like janky as hell. Now they can't cut, right? Like the way to get around is like if you cut fast enough and make it like super energetic enough, then they can sort of still capture the spirit of that fight. But in one, it's awful because there's no room for them to do fancy editing, know?
And they're on a timeline too, right? Like they can't just send it back, right?
Absolutely. Or they have to be choice about what they send back, right? The ones that get them the biggest gains. And I remember when I proposed that, they were like, do not do that. That is so like that is so dangerous, quote unquote, dangerous for us because it doesn't give us any place to go. I fucking did it anyway, in a way, right? Where I was like I wasn't cutting, and I didn't cut, but I did wipe. You know what I mean? Like I would do like the Alfred Hitchcock sort of like rope trick where something would come towards the foreground and wipe through. That effectively is like a cut, right? But I remember doing that fight, and that's the kind of stuff that makes my mouth water. When I'm reading a script, I'm like, yeah, I get it. I get the narrative. And when I had really good relationships with all my directors, and they would sort of like, Eric, just land this, land this, and land this, and that's the narrative that you're going for. But from there, my mind goes like, what have I not seen before? What feels good to me? Like, what is the subtext of the narrative that helps leverage the actual story that's happening? You know?
Yeah. So you had a lot of experience working in animation. You're talking about it now, and it's sort of like almost as if you were directing in a sense, and then to transition into just doing designs, for instance, that seems like a totally different beast. Like, do you feel that in your heart you're more interested in the sort of cinematic experience, delivering a cinematic narrative, or are you more interested in the character design and iteration process? Like, where's your heart lie the most right now?
Oh, that's tough. I think if there's a through line through all of it, it would probably be that I like telling stories, right? Sometimes it's as obvious as panel work when it comes to comic books. Sometimes it's like storyboarding a sequence for an animated series, but sometimes it's through design, right? Like design tells a lot of story if you're doing it correctly, right? If you're doing it smartly and have an understanding of like, what does that piece of design help inform about that character, that environment, or that prop? If you're doing it correctly, you can, like, there is such an embedded narrative into that, something that's really, really small. And people they can really take away a lot from it, like based on society, based on personality, based on just like shape language, based on just like proportion. That in and of itself has good chunks of narrative in there if you're doing your job correctly.
Dude, I really appreciate you taking a minute of time out of your schedule to talk with me and my audience here on YouTube.
Of course, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I want to thank you so much for stopping by, Eric, and taking a minute out of your time. And can't wait to see what you do next, man. If you're bringing Twitch back, or if you're going to have a new project announced pretty soon. Everybody can follow you over on are you on Twitter, or are you on Instagram? You are on Instagram. You're blowing up on Instagram.
Yeah, Instagram is where I did a whole lot of posting. So you can go to instagram.com/Eric Canete, EricCanete.
I'll put that link underneath the video and in the video so people can find it. And
awesome.
We'll catch up again soon. All right.
Thanks, Trent.
Take it easy.